inches from my parents' door. Inside, my mother's voice carried clearly, dripping with casual confidence as she spoke to my golden child brother. "Don't stress about the $48,000 debt, Julian. We'll have your sister cover it. She has the savings and she never refuses family." A cold knot twisted in my stomach. The money they were so freely promising wasn't a family pool. It was my hard-earned life savings, meant for my own future. When I told my husband what I'd overheard, he didn't hesitate. He looked me dead in the eye and told me to move every single penny out of that joint access account immediately. I did it that very night, trembling. A week later, when my mother knocked on my front door with a fake smile and a contract in hand, I finally realized exactly what a genius my husband was. Follow my story to the end to see how it unfolds. My name is Violet, and I am 33 years old. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by two things: my absolute independence and my mother's absolute obsession with my younger brother, Julian. I built my career from the ground up, working late nights and saving every spare dime alongside my husband, David, to build a secure, stable future. We didn't ask for handouts, and we didn't expect them. Julian, who just turned 30, is a completely different story. To my mother, he can do no wrong. He is the perpetual golden child whose charm constantly outpaces his responsibility. Over the years, Julian has jumped from one failed business venture to another, each one flashier and riskier than the last. And every single time a project completely collapsed, my mother was right there to sweep the mess under the rug, making excuses for his terrible financial decisions. In our family, an unwritten rule quietly formed. Violet is the strong one who has everything handled, so Violet should always be the safety net when Julian stumbles. My mother viewed my hard work not as an achievement to be proud of, but as an endless reserve pool for her favorite child's reckless mistakes. I always tried to keep the peace, but a storm was brewing that none of us could take back. The turning point happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had driven over to my parents' house unannounced to drop off a birthday gift I'd bought for my father. As I walked up the porch steps, the front door was slightly ajar, just enough for voices to carry clearly into the quiet afternoon air. I was just about to knock on my parents' door when I heard my mother's voice from the living room, deep in conversation with Julian. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the wood as her words cut through the silence. "Don't stress about the debt. We'll have your sister cover it," she told him, her tone completely casual, as if she were offering him a cup of coffee instead of my future. "She never refuses family." I stood there, completely paralyzed in the shadows of the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs as the full weight of her betrayal sank in. Julian's voice followed, laced with nervous relief as he explained that the aggressive lenders were demanding the full $48,000 within weeks. My mother didn't even hesitate. She assured him that my bank account was more than enough to wipe his slate completely clean. She was planning to hand over my life savings without a single shred of guilt, completely taking my compliance for granted. Tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. I quietly backed away from the door, walked down the steps, and left without making a single sound. When I got home, I was completely devastated. The tears I'd been holding back since leaving my parents' porch finally spilled over, and I replayed my mother's cold words to David. I expected him to lose his temper, but instead, he handled the situation like an absolute chess grandmaster. He sat me down, handed me a glass of water, and listened intently without interrupting once. When I finished, a sharp, calculating look crossed his face. "If we openly confront your mother right now, she'll just play the victim," David explained calmly. "She'll gaslight you, accuse you of eavesdropping, and find another twisted way to manipulate the family assets to bail Julian out." He knew my mother's emotional patterns perfectly. Then, he looked me dead in the eye and delivered a genius strategy: savings accounts tonight. He didn't want us to just hide the money within our current bank where my mom might have connections or old parental access flags. Instead, he instructed me to open an entirely new account at a completely different financial institution, one my family didn't even know existed. We initiated the transfer that very hour, moving all $48,000 into a locked, high-yield account. Outwardly, Our public balances dropped to nearly zero, leaving absolutely nothing for my mother to steal. It was a brilliant, silent defense, and it set our counter-trap perfectly. The next 2 weeks were an absolute masterclass in psychological tension. Outwardly, everything seemed entirely normal, but underneath the surface, it felt like walking through a minefield. My mother and Julian acted as if they didn't have a single care in the world. They invited David and me over for casual family dinners, poured wine, and laughed at old memories, completely unaware that their massive $48,000 secret was sitting right there at the table with us. But as the days crawled by, the subtle psychological traps began. During dinner, my mom would sigh deeply, looking at Julian with pure pity before turning her eyes to me. She would drop casual, carefully rehearsed hints about how unpredictable the economy was, or how true family loyalty means stepping up when someone you love hits a rough patch. Julian would play along perfectly, looking down at his plate like a humbled, struggling soul who just needed a tiny break to turn his life around. It was agonizing to sit there, smiling and passing the salad bowl, while knowing exactly what they were planning to do to my life savings. Every instinct inside me wanted to scream, to throw the truth in their faces, and expose their manipulation right then and there. But every time I felt myself slipping, I would catch David's calm, steady gaze from across the table. His quiet confidence reminded me to play the part. Our money was safe, the trap was set, and all we had to do was wait for them to spring it. The tension finally broke on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when my mother unexpectedly showed up at my front door, looking wet, cold, and wearing an expression of pure, calculated tragedy. I let her in, and she immediately sat down at my kitchen table, sighing deeply as she poured herself a cup of hot tea. For the first 10 minutes, she didn't mention money at all. Instead, she spun a beautifully rehearsed, heartbreaking sob story about Julian's current situation. She claimed he was facing a temporary financial emergency through absolutely no fault of his own, and that his entire future hung completely in the balance. I sat across from her, maintaining total composure, watching her perform. Then, with a practiced, gentle smile, she reached into her designer purse and smoothly slid a folded document across the table toward me. It was a pre-drafted legal authorization form for a massive, immediate bank withdrawal from my savings account. She didn't ask if I had the money, and she didn't ask if I could spare it. She just handed me a pen, looking at me with eyes that completely expected me to blindly sign my life savings away out of pure family guilt. "It's just a short-term loan, Violet," she said softly, her voice dripping with that familiar, synthetic sympathy. "You're a sister, and family always protects family." She sat back, completely confident that her emotional trap had worked perfectly, waiting for me to lower my head, sign the paper, and hand over the $48,000. She had absolutely no idea that she was staring directly into a blank wall. I looked down at the document, picked up the pen, and set it aside. I looked my mother directly in the eye, smiled calmly, and told her that I couldn't sign the authorization form because that savings account was completely empty. For a second, she just stared at me, blinking in confusion. But as the reality of my words slowly sank in, her face twisted, and her transformation from a loving, tragic mother into a raging, furious woman was instant. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice shaking with anger as she accused me of being selfish, heartless, and a horrible sister. She demanded to know where the money was and how I could dare betray my own blood. But in her absolute fury and panic, she made a massive mistake. She let her guard down and accidentally let slip the real reason she was so desperate. It turns out, she hadn't just come to ask for a loan. She had already signed a legal document using my savings account as a financial guarantee with Julian's aggressive private lenders weeks ago, completely confident she could just slip in and take my money before anyone noticed. She had put my entire financial future on the line without my knowledge to protect her golden child. Now, because David and I had completely emptied the account, her entire fraudulent scheme had utterly collapsed. The lenders weren't going to get a single penny from me, and she was left holding the bag for Julian's massive $48,000 debt. She sat there trembling, realizing her perfect little trap had snapped shut directly on her own wrist. Exactly 3 weeks later, the full scope of my husband's absolute genius became beautifully clear. Because our money had been completely cleared out and hidden away, Julian's aggressive private lenders didn't waste any time. They aggressively descended on my mother and brother, demanding immediate fulfillment of the financial guarantees she had illegally signed. With no access to my savings, the house of cards completely collapsed. To avoid devastating legal action and asset seizures, my mother was forced into a humiliating reality check. She had to urgently refinance her own home, stripping away her retirement security, while Julian was forced to sell his flashy luxury car just to scrape together the remaining balance of the $48,000 debt. The golden child was finally left with nothing but the consequences of his own reckless actions, and my mother learned the hard way that my life savings was never her personal piggy bank. Now, I'm incredibly curious about all of you who have followed my journey until the very end. What would you have done if you found out your own mother tried to secretly pledge your life savings to cover a sibling's mistakes? Would you have emptied the account like David and I did? Or would you? And don't forget to mention the city you are watching from so I can see exactly how far my story has reached.